How many times have you heard a response from a fellow, brother and sister in Christ when they witnessed a need? What kind of possible judgments came out of their mouth? Whether it was, well, if they're in need, they need to get a job, or, if they were financially responsible, they wouldn't be in need. And so the need, goes forth, but there's no one to answer their need because of the judgments learned in this world. So, do you honestly act in that way when you see a need? And it reminds me of the scripture from James that if you see, a brother or sister that has a need, and you say, "Go, be happy, be well fed," and do nothing to care for them, then how can God's love be in you? So that's basically the topic of this video is, seeing a brother or sister in need, or anybody in the world, and refusing to help them. I've heard of, people in the past that, they said that they would pray about it, but they never pray about it, about helping them, or they say, well, I don't feel led. So because they feel that way, the need goes unmet. But my question to them is, have they ever asked God about should they answer that need? So all of what I'm going to be speaking about really hinges on, these two areas. The first one is loving money or not loving money. And then the second is, whose money is it, yours or God's? Now, if you love money, then you don't want to part with it. You think about what you want to do with it, and basically you have plans for the money that you make. Now, in this world, different plans could be like saving a portion of it or investing a portion of it. Whatever it might be, you're saving some for an emergency, and, whatever it might be. So you really don't have the funds to be able to help anybody in need. That's, that's one area. But other plans could be like, going on a vacation and doing this or doing that with the money that you make. A lot of people that are trying to save become like misers. They save every little penny. And with that in their minds, there is no helping anybody. In their minds, they think, well, I made it in my own steam, so these other people can do it too. If they're in need, then they can get a job. And really, that sounds like Scrooge. Scrooge was a miser. And, my question to a lot of Christians is Scrooge a financial model for you? Now, when two people came asking for donations by Scrooge, he said, well, let the needy find a job and, take care of their needs. But, at the close, and I'm thinking of the George C. Scott movie. I don't know if it's in the book. I'll have to get, Scrooge one day, from Charles Dickens and read all about it. But I'm basically going from the movie where, he put forth that judgment, and the ghost of Christmas Present sent him and showed him a family. And the father of the family, he was looking for a job and he couldn't find one. And his family was in need, his family was homeless. And so he suggested to his wife that she would go to a place to where her and the kids would be taken care of. And she's like, she didn't want to separate from him. And he looks at his hands and he says, these are good, strong hands. How is it I can't find a job? And so, Scrooge turns to the ghost and is like, why are you showing me this? What does this have to do with me? And so the ghost tells him that you made a judgment earlier stating that if there is a needy person, then they need to find a job. Well, how can you find a job if it's hard to find? It's in today's world, it's hard to find a job. I recall before my arrest in 2008, I put countless resumes in for graphic design positions, but because I had an associate's, degree and not a bachelor's, the bachelor's would be taken. And I guess in this world, rightfully so, because they have more experience than I do. So I can understand where people are coming from. And you want to look at somebody that's homeless, how can they get a job if, you know, they don't have a place to freshen up? They don't have clothes to wear. They're on the streets, and if you had a little compassion, you would see that it's cold out during the winter time, so they got to go to a place to get warm so they can sleep. And today my wife and I were passing after, we helped my mom move into her new place. We happened to pass by this homeless person laying on the ground on the sidewalk. All her stuff was in front of her. And so, there is no place for them to be able to do this. And who knows how long until a police officer comes up to her and says, you need to move. There's just a lack of compassion and understanding in this world. And, are we walking with that lack of compassion? Because we have in our minds, the rules of the ideal man, that we need to become financially successful. And anybody that doesn't is disobedient to the pattern that was laid out before them. Now, if you don't love money, you can give it away only to receive more, and that is something that people who have money have never done. It recalls of my wife who works as a cosmetologist. She has many different clients. Some are rich and some are poor. And the poor ones actually tip while the rich don't. And so my wife did this rich girl's hair, and as soon as she was done, she received no tip. While somebody that was poor came, had their hair done, and my wife got tipped. So you could see the mentality that there is no helping anybody in need. There is no tipping. There's just nothing. And that's because they love their money and they don't want to part with it. Now this moves in the line of stewardship. I gave a video on that earlier, probably like 2 weeks ago. And in it, I was speaking about more or less whose money is it? Is it yours or is it God's? And I said that at the beginning. Now, if you have the mentality that God is your source, like so many people claim it, but they never walk it out. If God was your source, then you are stewarding his money for him, which means that what if he wants you to give a portion of the money that you have to somebody in need? And a lot of people won't because they love the money that they apparently make. But everything just goes back to God. You may boast that you have such a great job that you go to every morning, but you wouldn't have that job if you didn't have a breath in your body. You wouldn't have that job if you didn't have the strength to go to your job every morning. So everything goes back to God. Everything, it's like, all the rivers, they flow to, apparently one spot, and then they spread out. So everything goes back to God. It reminds me of 1 John 3:17, and I'm going to read that now. Now John says, "But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? Little children, let us not love with word or with tongue, but in deed and in truth." So getting back to the original point that if you love money, then you will follow the ideal man's advice regarding the needy. And that, lines up with the thinking of Scrooge, that if they are in need, let them get a job. Now, like the question I posed earlier, whose money? If it's yours, you won't give it away. And if you give, you want assurance of repayment. You want to be sure your money is used for good financial purposes. And that's the problem. So with that mentality, there is no way that you're going to give to anybody that's in need, because you have, number one, you have this money that you want to reserve for your personal purposes. And number two, on the opposite is that you would dare not to give it to somebody that, according to your mind and your prejudging, if you do it, that you're not going to give to somebody who is financially irresponsible. So you don't want your hard-working money going to somebody like that. But the question is if you're a Christian, and you hear God's voice, then you need to do what God has said. Now, under God, it's different rules. God doesn't hold to the financial laws that the world has. He has a different mindset regarding it. And you can see that, I believe it was in the book of Leviticus, where he told people that own vineyards not to pick up any that have fallen to the ground, because they are reserved for the poor and the needy and the alien among them. And so God even then was thinking about anyone that was less fortunate than those that were rich. So you have one example here of God's viewpoint regarding the poor and needy. He doesn't show a lack of compassion to the needy. He says we are to give. That's two separate things. He doesn't show a lack of compassion to the needy. Now, he says that we are to give. And since it is God's, ask him what you should do and who you should help. Now, an area that has really bothered me in the past when my rest started was I had a certain need for something. I think it was like bread or milk. And, sharing with a mother in the faith about that need. And I was telling her I wasn't asking her, mind you, for any kind of money or anything. I just said, yeah, I'm standing in faith for, a personal need. And right away she hits back with, I don't feel led to give anything to you. I was like, gee, okay. And really, you have to wonder, did she hear that from God? Number one. If she didn't hear it from God, was it a personal judgment on her part to me? And, that would seem, pretty quick response for somebody that was in need. And it goes back to what it said in John, that if you see your brother or sister in need and you do nothing to help them, how can God's love be in you? So, do we do that as Christians? We look at it from a spiritual perspective, in a spiritual point of view, and we make judgments on our fellow brothers and sisters. Say, we want to make it sound, spiritual and give them a little Christianese. And so we say, I don't feel led to give it to you. Let them work for what they need. So it's just absolutely, if you see a brother or sister in need and you do nothing to help them, what is your Christian faith for? If you have the means to help somebody, that's an opportunity from God to show his love, to be an answer to somebody's prayer, to be that miracle for them. I've heard tons of miracles about when somebody needed something and, God answered. It was like this one testimony I heard about this man that was driving, and he felt the impression of going to a certain area in his neighborhood, an area he hasn't been down. And God was directing him in each way to go. And so he got up to the door and he heard yelling. And so he knocks on the door and, apparently a father answers. He's like, what? And so, he said, I feel led to give this gallon of milk to you. And the father was like, so he shuts the door. He said he'd be back. And his daughter comes up, and the baby's crying. And come to find out, they didn't have any more milk. They ran out of milk, and the baby was hungry. Look at that. God's need. Now, this brother could have been like, well, if there's anybody in need, let them work for it. No, that's not how God works. So to even contemplate on praying about helping somebody, that there's a serious issue there. And I already gave the example of 1 John 3:17. So my question is, why not help? Now, is it because you love money? And it goes back to the question, whose money is it? Now, this is the love money test about whether or not to help somebody. And I already gave them, but I'm going to give them again because I want you to see right there. No, it's going to be up here. The words of the love money test. And it needs to pass, the thinking needs to pass through these two questions before an answer is given. So my question is, whose money is it? And is it because you love money? So I want them to pass through that before they even think. So if you're up to this fellow brother and sister that has a need, you have the means to help them. What would stop you? Is it because you think that it's your money and that you don't want to help somebody? And it's because you love money. So if it passes through those two without an issue and you desire to help them, I commend you. But if it passes through them and you have a personal judgment toward anybody that is less fortunate or has a need, then there is an issue there that you do love money. And that is how you know you love money, is if you refuse to part with it and you agree with the world's viewpoint that somebody that is in need needs to get a job. Now, something that we need to work toward is asking God what we should do, because it is his money and we're stewarding it for him. Now, if you hear from God whether to help and you don't love money and it's not yours, it's a different matter. God has a plan for the needy, and he just wants to share that with you. So if you encounter a need, don't personally go to God and, while you love money, because you're going to look for any reason not to help anybody in need. But you're going to go to God and say, God, what should I do? How much should I give? What should I give? And he'll reveal it to you. It just takes time to listen to him. So, you know what? I'm going to end it here. I thank you for taking the time to watch, and I pray that, this video has blessed you. God bless you all.